Good evening to everyone. Welcome to OHEL's TheraZoom. I am David Mandel, and we will be introducing our special guests this evening and our special conversation in just a moment as additional people are joining. We'll be back to you in just a minute or two. Thank you. Everyone just hold on, please. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to OHEL's TheraZoom. TheraZoom is a platform that we began over the last year or two as everyone was spending much time at home. And this was an opportunity for us to come into your homes and provide information on a range of mental health issues. While we have muted everyone, we invite you all to submit your questions on the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen or that's on your screen. And we will get to as many questions as possible while our special guests are speaking. So please feel free, as the conversation progresses, to ask your question. I thank my colleague Yit Zelman, Director of OHEL's Mental Health Services Housing Program, for organizing this special evening. The topic this evening is navigating uncharted waters when a family member comes out, a mental health perspective. Rabbi Mark and Rebbetzin Adina Penner will be speaking about a family member that has come out, to use that term this evening. Rabbi Penner is the Dean of REITS, Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary of Yeshiva University, which includes the Smicha program of YU. Rabbi Penner is the Dean in YU of the Smicha program. Rabbi and Rebbetzin Penner are the former Rav and Rebbetzin of the Young Israel of Holliswood, Queens, prior to the moving out to the Five Towns. We've invited Rabbi and Rebbetzin Penner, and they've very graciously agreed to speak about their own personal experience of a family member coming out, as well as giving advice to community, to other families. We're joined by Rabbi Mark and Rebbetzin Adina Penner. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us, and thank you for creating a Zoom around this very important topic.
Please share with us anything that you would like about your family, about your son, and the conversation this evening, the topic of which we've just mentioned, coming out.
Start with the story.
Okay, we're going to start by giving you a little bit of background, a little bit about us, our son, and what we've been through over the past number of years with him. We have been blessed Baruch Hashem, with five amazing children. Our son Gedalia is number 3 of our 5 kids. He is gay. He came out to us when he was 15 years old. He is now 26 years old, almost 27 at this point. So it was 12 years ago that he came out to us. At this point in time, he is married to a man. He got married about 1.5 years ago, and they currently live in Philadelphia. Gedalia is a very spiritual individual, and definitely a very religiously connected person. At this point in his life, he aligns himself with the conservative community. He's actually currently enrolled in JTS's Chazanas program. JTS, for those who don't know, is a school of the conservative movement. They train their rabbis and their chazanim, and he is hoping to enter a career in chazanis in the conservative community in the next couple of years. When Gedalia was a young child, he was definitely a little different, not your typical little boy. He was and continues to be about as sweet, kind, friendly, and warm and enveloping as any human being could be. Very charming, very complimentary. He was a kid who would walk into the kiddush room in shul on Shabbos and find the older ladies and comment on how beautiful they looked that Shabbos, how pretty their dresses were or their hair looked. Or we used to call him Little Mr. Sunshine. He would walk into a room and just make everybody feel so good just by his presence. And he always had a kind, complimentary word for everyone. And he still does. He was never into sports, really not interested in sports at all, very into dolls for many years, and also always very into art. He took art lessons, music. He's extremely musically talented, poetry, creative writing, very, very expressive individual. And again, continues to be that way until today. The summer after 9th grade, he was away at a sleepaway camp program for the summer. He came home and sat us down a few days later to let us know that he was gay. And he was rather confident about it. It wasn't like he was struggling at that point anymore, really, to figure it out. I think he was pretty confident at that point that he definitely was gay, and he was sharing it with us. My husband will tell you that he was completely shocked by this revelation, totally didn't see it coming at all. For me, I have to say that definitely over the years, I had a little bit of suspicion about it. I definitely worried about it a little bit. Never said anything out loud, never worried about it out loud, never even shared it with my husband. I think I was too afraid to, utter that thought, share it with anybody, and really just hoping and trying to convince myself that I was wrong about it, and that as other men that I know and that I assume we all know, he was maybe just, an effeminate type of guy, but not gay. Definitely tried to convince myself of that. But despite the fact that I had some suspicions over the years, did not make it any easier to hear it when he shared it, nor did it make it any easier to accept it. Wasn't easy for either of us. As soon as Gedalia came out, the two of us, as we are rabbis and rebbitzins and like to fix problems, we immediately went into our, let's work on figuring out how to fix this problem kind of mode, and started contacting our psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, friends for some guidance. We're used to doing that all the time to try to find, resources for a lot of our balbatim. We never let on that we were asking this time for ourselves, but we started reaching out for help. And what our friends came back to us with was that conversion therapy or reparative therapy was the way to go at that point. That's what people were doing. And they provided us with a couple of names of individuals who could be helpful to us, who were in the area. So we were not about to force any type of therapy on Gedalia. I don't think you could really force anybody to participate in therapy. If they're not interested in being there and they're not going to talk, then it's pretty useless. but we sat him down to talk about the idea, to see what he thought. And he actually was very willing to give it a shot and to see where it would go. So we began the journey of reparative therapy. The therapy part was probably pretty okay for Gedalia. Like I said, he's a very expressive young man, and I don't think it was a bad thing. And I don't think he probably would tell you also that it wasn't a terrible thing, that he was meeting with a therapist 2 times a week. This was definitely a very difficult time in his life. We also weren't really prepared. We weren't as good at being so supportive of him at that point. And I think it was very good that he had someone out of the house to speak to a bit about it. The conversion part of the therapy, not so good. Definitely very challenging. You could imagine that it's very difficult to be in therapy and attempting to work on therapeutic goals. You know, when you go to therapy, so every week, couple of weeks, there are certain goals that the homework that the therapist gives you and goals that you're supposed to be achieving. And, you know, he kind of kept coming back, not having really been able to achieve those goals. And the response was always that if he wasn't making it to those goals, then obviously he wasn't working hard enough and he didn't want it badly enough. And he really was actually working very hard and trying very hard. I think he was really giving it his best shot, but he just couldn't get there. And that, as you could imagine, was extremely, extremely frustrating for him. And it was very unnerving for us as well. We really never knew what it was going to be like after a therapy session. He would come out. Sometimes it was perfectly fine and normal, and he was in a fine mood. And sometimes he was just very, very down or very, very angry. And it could last for a couple of days at a time. It was very, very difficult, very challenging. But to his credit, he stuck out this therapy for 3 long years. He started at the beginning of 10th grade, and he did it straight through the end of 12th grade until he was off to Israel to learn in yeshiva for the year. Obviously, if we could do this over again, we would not go the reparative therapy, conversion therapy route, nor could we at this point, because I believe it's outlawed in all 50 states at this point. So I guess it wasn't only not working for him. It's not an accepted therapy at this point in time for people who are gay. Apparently, it doesn't really work, and whatever. So we definitely would not have gone that route if we could go back in time. But again, Gedalia did give it his best shot. And it just turns out that there is not so much that you can really do in terms of therapy to change someone's sexual orientation. Take over a little.
Yeah. So when Gedalia came back from learning in Israel, so he kind of had decided that this was who he was. He kind of came to terms with the fact that he's gay, and the question was, what next? Gedalia was pretty convinced throughout that he would marry a man and still do his best to stay part of the Jewish community in some way. At the time, I think he felt probably more even the Orthodox community, but certainly felt that he'd be part of the community. The years that followed were rather difficult. Gedalia coming to terms with, this very different future than a child imagines for himself or herself. And experimentation. How much could he push the limits at home and otherwise? And eventually got to the point that he started to date, and that was a really, really difficult time for us. And eventually met someone, decided to get married. I think that if you had asked us at the time if we would still have a relationship with Gedalia, if he would go down the route, if you had asked us when he was 19, if he ever decided to live a gay lifestyle or marry a man, whether we would continue to have a relationship with him, we'd say, probably we don't know how, we don't know what. But as we'll talk about, when you love your child, you figure out how to make it work. That doesn't mean you approve. It doesn't mean that you celebrate, but it means that you accept that this is a decision they've made. And we continue, Baruch Hashem, to have a relationship with Gedalia and with Caleb, who he's married to. And that's sort of where we are today.
Thank you very much, Rebbetzin and Rabbi Penner. For the people on the call who may not be aware, reparative therapy, or as you mentioned it, conversion therapy, was a concept in which therapists or counselors tried to convert people who had gay feelings, who said that they were gay, who came out as gay, to influence them or convince them that they're not gay. That was the conversion from gay to not gay. And as you said, that type of therapy has since been debunked, and it is not only not prevalent, it's essentially not legal to do it. It's not viewed as a legitimate basis of therapy. I just wanted to explain that for the people that may not be aware of that term.
Thank you for
Right.
clarifying.
And I think it's the most important thing to understand about it is regardless of, whether it's legal, illegal, you can't really say regardless of illegal and illegal, but regardless of whether it's legal or illegal, we're people who are in touch with dozens, if not hundreds of families, individuals. We just have not found anyone who only has attraction to the same sex, who has been able through this therapy to develop attraction to the opposite sex. I'm not saying that we didn't wish it worked. We're not saying we're morally against the concept of a person who wants to change their attraction being able to do so. But unfortunately, certainly amongst those who have no attraction or almost no attraction to the opposite sex, it just doesn't seem to work. And that's hard to face that reality that's where your child or you are if you're the individual. But unfortunately, we haven't yet found a therapy or something that can change one's level of attraction per se.
Let's have a conversation for a little bit. I just want to remind everyone who may have joined a few minutes late. This is Ohel's Therazum on the conversation about coming out and navigating uncharted waters when a family member comes out as gay, a mental health perspective. Rabbi Mark and Rebbetzin Adina Penner, who have just spoken about their son Gedalia as coming out 12 years ago at the age of 15. We invite everyone to use the Q&A function to ask your question. I am the only one that will see your questions. No one else who's joining us this evening see the questions, and then we will pose your questions to Rabbi Mark and Rebbetzin Penner. Let's talk about reciprocity for a moment. I had the opportunity to listen to you, Rabbi Penner, with your son Gedalia, speaking together about this conversation. And both of you spoke openly with each other, and you said just a few minutes ago, when you love your child, you figure out how to make it work. Talk about, we heard how you feel about Gedalia. Talk about how Gedalia feels about you and this conversation, and how her son feels about his parents, who initially had difficulty with it and traveled down the road to accept it. Where's the reciprocity today in that relationship?
I think that the relationship isn't perfect because we stumble over each other. It's a dynamic relationship, but it's one where both sides are committed to figuring out how to make it work. Gedalia will be our son no matter what he does. We will be his parents no matter what he does. And my wife and I speak about the fact that we feel that that's a divine shlichus. That's that we were selected to be his parents. We don't know why people have these feelings, why people have different sexual orientations, nature, nurture, but we don't believe something like that is an accident. We don't really believe anything's an accident. And we feel that, our job is to figure out how to be his parents. He is particularly understanding, and that's kind of made this work as well, of trying to understand that it's difficult for us. It remains difficult. It's uncomfortable. It's not the dream that you have for your child. And he knows that, and that's very painful. that he knows that this isn't the dream we have, and this isn't the dream he had for himself when he was a young child, probably. But we do our best to, to remain a family.
And when we trip up, which we do sometimes, we definitely still make mistakes and we might come across issues. But the key for us is the open and honest communication that we have with him. And he's great at expressing when something is wrong, and we feel comfortable also to express. But I think that's really a key. And if you're going to maintain a relationship, I think it's very important to have real open lines of communication and be able to be, really honest with each other, even though sometimes those conversations could be very difficult. But had in the correct way with a lot of respect on both ends, it works. It's okay.
Right. Everyone should be reminded on this seminar that, Gedalia came out to us 12 years ago. He didn't come out to us 12 days ago. He didn't come out to us 12 months ago. Generally, when a child first comes out to their parents, there is a very rocky time that develops for several reasons. First of all, because the child, him or herself, may not be settled themselves. As long as the child is in that state of tremendous turmoil and fear and anxiety, it's very difficult. We often speak to parents and tell them that whatever this will be in 2 years or in 3 years, the level of tension will probably come down. No matter what your child decides, even if your child takes a path that brings him in your mind further away from your family and from Yiddishkeit, the level of tension, if you handle it right, will come down over time. And second of all, because it's very difficult for parents to accept this at first and to understand what's going on. Many are caught very much by surprise when their children come out to them. The children have often been dealing with it for many years, and they're in intense pain by the time they come out. And on the other side, the parents are just hearing about it, and they need time to process it and to accept it. So it can be a very rocky process. And when we are able to get through discussions like this without crying, it's not because of the strength of the fortitude of our will. It's because over time you develop ways of dealing with it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you strength to be able to find ways to move forward. But it's very, very difficult when a child first comes out to their parents, and again, right, tremendously difficult for the individual.
I'd like to continue and extend the conversation of reciprocity a little bit into family relationships. This is a mental health perspective that we're discussing this evening, personal perspective, mental health perspective. And in the mental health community, stigma is a word that we use often. The stigma of disabilities, the stigma of a divorce, the stigma of finish the sentence in so many different ways. So reciprocity in terms of siblings, family members, grandparents, the Shabbos table, Pesach, Chagim, inviting, not inviting, who's comfortable, who's not, neighbors, the stigma associated with it, how to deal with it. I can give another 20 examples, but one example is enough. Choose one of the more difficult ones that you've experienced.
Yeah, I mean, we could answer if it was a 12-hour Zoom seminar. We could do that also. Do you want to start? Should I start?
You start. Go ahead.
There's two things. First of all, there's the individual when he or she is an individual, and then there is, and today it's very common that if a person does come out, that they're likely to try at least to find a partner, and how complicated that becomes. I think it's actually interestingly most difficult for certain family members, even more than others around them, because family members are concerned, even though they may not say it. Family members are concerned about what it means for their family, right? I think that, we find that, immediate siblings who are younger are in a different generation, and they often, especially if they're not married yet, they tend to respond actually fairly understandingly. The most difficult challenge is often the married sibling, certainly if the person is, this doesn't pick a color of yarmulke or a color of Judaism, but if there's a sibling who's to the right of wherever the individual is, and they're married, and especially if they have a couple of kids, that's often where we find the greatest challenge, because it just throws that sibling into a terrible situation of their own. What does this mean? Do I have to expose my kids to it? Do I have to be known by having a brother or a sister like this? So that tends to be, very often the toughest type of family relationship. It's difficult. What would you say about the community?
What would I say about the community? We had a relatively decent experience with the community. So it depends what community you're coming from. The community could be theoretically very tough. Definitely could be. In the more modern Orthodox community, I think they're a little bit, they more easily accept, the individuals. I think, but there are those and there are those. And
certainly
I
as
think,
you go to the right.
Yeah. And then there will definitely be people who will be standing around and judging. They'll be looking at the family and judging however, they're dealing with the situation, whether they, decide to continue a relationship with the kids, or even if they distance, they might be sitting in judgment of people, and that could be very tough.
What do you always say? You always say that, it's very easy to judge until the child is in your family. I think I'll just add one point. I think that a certain amount of the judging that we do, and we all judge others on a regular basis, a certain amount of the judging that we do about people who are LGBT is because of just a lack of understanding what it is and where it comes from. If you assume, for example, that people choose their sexual orientation, if you assume that they choose to be gay, then, you're going to take a certain approach to them. They're looking to sin. What's wrong with being a regular person? If you accept that regardless of how it develops, it's not something that a person chooses. If you accept that, if you also accept that it's much harder to stay closeted, than one might thought. I think we originally couldn't understand, like, what's the big deal? Why do you need to be open about things? And I think it took us a long time to understand that pretending to be something else for such a long time is
very painful.
Very, very, very painful, especially in a world of our kids where almost everything is known about you, right? There's no privacy, right? If I remember once there was a comment I was called because a 15-year-old, this was a year, at this point it would be every day, but a 15-year-old came out on their Facebook account and they were like, oh my God, this person must be seeking a union with a same-sex partner. And I tried to explain that everything about their life, for better or for worse, is on this Facebook account. Everything about them is there in front of everybody, except for something that for them is very central to who they are. It's a different future. It's a different trajectory. And therefore, if we look at people that come out as A, not having chosen their orientation, and B, just trying to tell the truth about who they are, then it becomes easier to say that's who you are, and not to judge them in the way that we naturally do.
The nature versus nurture conversation is its own complicated conversation, biologically and everything related to it. When you use the word pretending, I nodded my head because that goes right to the mental health conversation. Individuals who have not come out publicly as gay speak a lot about suffering, exactly what you talked about, being hidden, being alone, being isolated. They'll be judged. There are issues of self-esteem. There are issues of depression, of severe depression, of self-medication, of self-harm. And I could just go on because we've had so many such conversations with individuals that we work with. I don't want to say that we treat. I want to say that we help. Talk a little bit about that issue of isolation and self-esteem and depression. And it doesn't stop because you come out from the closet. Everything is linear, everything takes time. What's your experience, and what's your experience from other families that you've spoken with?
It doesn't stop when somebody comes out of the closet, but it makes it a lot easier when finally you're able to connect with other people and speak to other people. The biggest, when we speak to people, the greatest feedback we get, the most important thing that we can give over to anybody is that they're not alone. There is just something terrible about feeling like you are alone in this challenge and you have nobody to talk to. So, again, it doesn't take everything away, but it makes a big difference. It's a big load off your shoulder. That walking around also with the fear of, God forbid, what happens if somebody's going to find out. Once you get it out there and people are finding out, and hopefully the reactions are not quite as horrific as you may have imagined them to be, it's just a whole different ballgame. And that's true for the individual as well as for parents and family members. I mean, we often talk to family members about, the idea of them coming out. I know that sounds strange. You don't usually hear that term in terms of the parents and the family, but sometimes that's really important for parents and family members to be able to say this out loud, share it with some friends. It's a huge load off of their shoulders. And also, I really believe that when they can say it out loud and they begin to be able to speak to somebody else or a few other somebodies about it, it's the beginning of their ability to really accept the situation, accept that this is their reality, and begin to try to figure out how they're going to move forward now with this new reality that they're dealing with.
I have about 25 more questions, so just let's keep going. Would this conversation be different if we were talking about two women who are married versus two men, in your opinion?
I don't think so. It's interesting. I mean, without getting into the details of it, the Torah speaks of a particular act between two men, which isn't necessarily something that's practiced by gay men necessarily all the time. But clearly, when we're dealing with two men who are married, theoretically, we're talking about an Isser Kares, a particular sin. When it comes to the prohibition for two women, probably D'Rabbanan at best, not permitted. I think it's important to understand that for parents.
But by Penna, not everyone understands the word Rabbanan.
Sorry, probably a rabbinic prohibition. But it's interesting that doesn't really change the reality, because when parents see their child get married to someone of the same sex, ultimately, what pains them is not the fact that their children might be committing an aveira, committing a sin, whether it's a biblical sin or a rabbinical sin. What pains them is the loss of the dream that they had for the child. Within the Orthodox world, kids have choices, they take different paths, but they're really within a fairly narrow range. You expect that if you have 4 kids, then 4 kids will get married. You'll make them a zinkatans. You'll make the special ritual that we do at the end of when all your last kid gets out of the house. You take a broom, and that they'll all suddenly start having children, and you'll have grandchildren, and you go to your friend's house, and they have that big picture on the wall, and that's what your family is going to be. And that's not the way most families are. And when your child comes out as gay, the toughest pill to swallow is that loss of that idealized future for your child. So it's really not about a particular aveira, a particular sin that they might be committing. It's that loss of what we're hoping for, what everyone hopes for their children. So it doesn't really make a difference whether one is talking about male or female.
How does that feel for your parents or in-laws, the next generation, which has that dream you just described, times 1,000?
For asking that question, but probably.
I love how the two of you look at each other. Which one
it's probably similar. We're each hoping that the other one will take the question. But interestingly, we find that there are exceptions. But interestingly, grandparents, while many people's biggest fear is telling their elderly parents, like the parents that we speak to, Their biggest fear is when their older parents find out. Grandparents take this, in most cases, I think, better than expected, because
Different level of love between a grandparent and a grandchild.
it's a different thing.
It's a different relationship.
It's a different thing. And
They can't do anything wrong.
no, it's not that they can do anything wrong, but as a grandparent, and we're blessed with that, with that being at that stage of our lives, you can't imagine that a grandchild is even more precious than a child. And the thought of losing that child, losing that grandchild, it's not, there's no thought of cutting it. To get a grandparent to cut ties with a grandchild is just,
Usually not going to happen.
I think it's something that a parent might do in an extreme case. It's hard to imagine a grandparent doing. So grandparents tend to take it, and we also, so many times, right, people will tell us that they were so nervous and they told Granny, and Granny's
It's
like,
oh, I
I
knew.
knew the whole time. Come on, what are you? We hate to laugh in a seminar about something that's so serious, but that's happened a bunch of times where they were terrified to tell the grandmother, and the grandmother knew the whole time, and she knew someone back in the shtetl who was gay, and these aren't funny issues, but sometimes you might be surprised how the grandparents actually get it.
I'm going to go into a different part of the conversation right now. I want to reverse the conversation right now. Somebody posed a question who's listening this evening in the following way. We're talking about a child coming out as gay and how parents deal with it. What about a situation in which a parent comes out as gay? How should the child respond to that?
When a parent comes out of it, how should a child respond to that?
How does a family respond to that? The parent is married, the couple are married, and one of the two in the couple come out as gay, and now they have a family, and they have children, and they have a community. What advice can you give to the children about dealing with the parents?
It's obviously a very difficult, and it's difficult to advise a child what to do with their parents, in the sense that children aren't ever rational about their parents. When we teach Chassanim and Kalas, and we talk about getting along with your parents and in-laws, children are never rational about their own parents. So already it's a very difficult situation. It has to be almost unimaginably difficult for the child to understand what that is, and to understand how they got there. I mean, think of children of a bad divorce, and what that is. I think I would use this opportunity to go to the beginning of how the marriage was created.
Yes.
Very
important to talk
certainly
about.
In a situation where someone does not have attraction to the opposite sex, they should not be getting married. And I know that that's a controversial statement, but we speak on a regular basis to families like this, where someone was just told, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. You'll get over it. Just get married. And they did. And in the vast majority of cases, it seemed that it's only a matter of time till the person breaks. I'm not talking about someone who is bisexual and is struggling. Of course, that the spouse, of course, needs to know before they would go into that. But it's incredibly difficult. And I know that there are still people that are meaning well and advising people who are gay to just try to get married. And, what I say, even though it's a little bit of whatever, I say, I tell the gay individual says, so-and-so told me to just try to marry a girl. And I tell him to say, is your daughter single? And if you wouldn't want this fellow to marry your daughter, so why are you necessarily advising him to marry someone else's? So it's a very serious issue, and obviously poskim and others need to be involved, but things don't change just because you get married. That's true about a lot of issues. Things don't change just because your problems don't go away just because you decide to get married. And this, it has to be taken very seriously, because the danger lurking around the corner, certainly once there are children, can be great. And you might argue, if someone's gay, how could there be children? Not for a public discussion. how that happens, but that doesn't mean that there's really necessarily any attraction or any of that kind of relationship between the parents.
I found your comparison to a high conflict divorce a very good one. In so far as we're speaking about a situation in which the parents may get divorced because one of them identified as gay. And then you have the entire conversation about the effects on children and whether or not it's going to be, there is no easy, but a smooth versus a high conflict divorce. And our perspective at OHEL on high conflict divorce is you as adults have a choice. The Hebrew word bechira. Your children, certainly minors, don't have a choice, especially as your children. So you as two adults, if one of you is coming out as gay, have to do whatever you have to do to protect the children. You as adults take care of yourselves. Focus on the children, whatever that means. Now, if you need support from an organization like OHEL or therapist or counseling, we don't rush to therapy. We talk about support, or your friends' support, community support, rabbinical support, whatever it is. Our answer would be to this couple, one of them coming out as gay, focus on your kids. Take care of the kids.
Right.
You mentioned in your conversation that Gedalia has moved to Philadelphia and is in the conservative JTS, a Jewish Theological Seminary, learning to be a cantor. Did he move because he wanted to go to JTS in Philly, or because he felt more comfortable to get away from the community and leave Orthodox Judaism and practice conservative? What's that part of the conversation, since you mentioned it?
He definitely he was leaving the Orthodox community because he just didn't feel 100% comfortable and accepted there. Certainly given the life path that he took, I think he realized that it would just be a lot easier and more comfortable for him within the conservative world, where this is really just, it's just not an issue at all. It makes absolutely no difference, if you're married to a man or a woman, so it's a lot easier and more comfortable for him and for his spouse. He did not move to Philadelphia to run away from anything here. As a matter of fact, he's moving back to the New York area probably this summer. He just happened to wind up for various reasons, other things that he was involved with in the Philadelphia area. He wound up moving to Philadelphia, and his Chazana school happened to have been on Zoom for all this time, but now it's going back into person. So he's coming back to the New York area. So he wasn't running away from anything, but joining more, being more aligned with the conservative movement definitely just is a comfort thing. Is a comfort thing, and I think a lot of individuals feel the same way.
I think it's actually even beyond comfort in a certain sense that Gedalia wants to be a mashpia. He wants to be someone who is raising people up. He is within the conservative movement. He's a force already, even though he's still in school, and he very much wants to follow in the footsteps of what his parents are doing. I know that for those of you who are watching could imagine that a rabbi and a rebbitzin having a son who's gay and who made the decision to marry a man, there couldn't be any greater turning a back on his parents and their lifestyle. But that's not exactly what it is for him. There was one night where, my wife was talking to him about why he was making these decisions. And he said something that was incredibly startling. He said, Mommy, what was the phrase?
So I think we were sitting and talking, and I think I posed him the question of, where he saw himself in a few years down the line, how he, pictured his life, what kind of a life he was going to have. And he said to me, Mommy, I want the same things that you and Abba have. I want to find a life partner. I want love. I want emotional connection. I want children. I want a Shabbos table. It says, I want everything that you have. I just can't have it with a woman. Which was, when he said it to me, was just so it was such a, I was a chiddush, how do you say this? It was such a, I just like really
So eye-opening. Right?
took me by surprise when he said it. I was just, I'm embarrassed to say how surprised I was, but I was. I think sometimes when a child comes out to you in a way, you might look at it as like the ultimate form of rebellion and rejection of the way that you brought them up and the way you tried to educate them. And, they're kind of like, you feel like maybe they're taking everything and kind of tossing it. And he was telling me exactly the opposite, that, he really loved everything that he saw in the house and he wanted everything that he saw in his house growing up, but he just couldn't have it in the exact same way that we have it. And he tried to figure out, how to carve out a life for himself that would somehow resemble the one he was looking for. And I say this, it was a very powerful and an eye-opening moment for me and really changed a lot the way, that I look at him. It made me take a step back and really think more, about his situation, think more about, what would I do if I were him? Do I know what I would do if I were him? And I to be intellectually honest, I have no idea what kind of decisions I would make if I were in his shoes. And, when I say this also, I just want to say that, yeah, I'm not sharing any of this to justify any decisions or any behaviors or anything like that. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily, that it's okay to, if you're gay, to act on those feelings and whatever. I just think it's important for people to understand a little bit, the gay individual's perspective and, where they're coming a little bit. I think, very often also when somebody comes out, we assume right away that the very act of coming out is their like the beginning of like their exit, from the community. And very often that's really not the case at all. They very much, want to stay connected. And I think those are, important things to understand. Also for community members to understand.
Hey, Penna, you used the word mashpia a few minutes ago, and mashpia means a teacher, an influencer. And you hardly need my comment about complimenting about how you've approached this. The greatest compliment that a child can give to a parent, I believe, is what you said. I want to follow in your footsteps. I want to do what you're doing. Over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a generation of high conflict relationships. Not only in high conflict divorces, which has increased significantly, as you know, exponentially, but also high conflict relationships between adolescents and parents. That's a separate, complicated conversation. When you have a child who happens to be gay, who says, Ima, Abba, I want for myself exactly what you have. I want to have what you have. There is no greater compliment. And maybe that was the invitation to say to you, because you respected me and because the way you treated me, I now understand how I should treat other people. That's my perspective on this. There are 51 more questions that people have, and we only have a few minutes left. So let's go through a few quick ones if we can. Quick question, quick answer.
Let's go.
How did Gedalia relate with his siblings? You said you have 5, Gedalia's 3 or 5. How did Gedalia relate with his siblings?
I'd say he's so lovable and for the most part, he made it work. He made it work.
They did also.
They did also. And they did also. They made it work with him. And he has very close relationships with them.
The emphasis is they made it work. That's the emphasis. They made it work with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. I know that you said that you've spoken with many people who, we have to maybe stop using the term came out of the closet and just have expressed their preference or their relationships or however. 2 questions. Number 1, orthodoxy versus non-orthodoxy. Can someone be gay? I know that you answered from an halachic standpoint. You're Ravav and a Rebbetzin. no less, you're the Dean of REITs, includes a smicha program. Can someone live a gay lifestyle within the Orthodox community?
It's challenging. Again, what does it mean to live within the Orthodox community? To live within the Orthodox community doesn't necessarily mean to keep 613 mitzvot. If someone is going to choose to act on that part of their life, we can not judge them, but we're also not going to say that it's okay by any means. But living in the Orthodox community is very different than never doing anything wrong or never violating any prohibitions. In theory, I think there can be a place if the community can try to be understanding or not judgmental, not understanding necessarily, but not judgmental. But it's harder than it seems, because there do probably have to be lines for the community to say, I'll accept this, but this is out of bounds. This is too much to accept within our shul. And from the perspective of the gay couple, they just don't want to be in a place where they feel like they're treated differently. And I understand both sides. I understand the shul saying, I can't wish you a mazel tov from the pulpit. Totally get that. And I think that's the right thing to say. You can't do that. But I could also stand the couple saying, how can I be in a shul that won't even recognize who we are? So it's more difficult to find those compromises, even if both sides want to make it work. It's much easier in a family. To be honest, it's tougher on a community level.
OHEL sees itself as a teaching organization in addition to being a mental health organization. So let's talk about the shul for a second. 20 years ago, it took a while for the shuls. Chas v'shalom, I'm not condemning anyone, not a word. I want to talk about the process of destigmatizing issues in the community. And I'm certainly not equating being gay with any mental health issues or problems. My question is on the stigma. It took a while for the shuls to talk about domestic violence and to talk about sexual abuse and to talk about addictions. And I'm not putting anything comparable to the other. Is there a time you think that shuls might talk about being gay a little bit more openly than we are right now?
Just talk about Highland Park.
We just spoke.
we just spoke this weekend. We were asked to come speak in Highland Park, New Jersey, over the weekend, and it was the whole Shabbos was not only about LGBT issues, but it was about children in general who take different paths than their parents and how we, navigate, within the family when those things happen. So it wasn't just us. There was someone else speaking also.
Right.
We did. And it was spoken about very openly in this environment. Many people came to all the different talks. And so, I mean, I kind of hope that we're, slowly, we'll be able to start speaking about it.
I think there are a lot of people that feel that if you say the word gay out loud, that you're somehow condoning it. When we say we accept that our son is gay and accept that our son married a man, we accept that that's a decision that he made. We accept that if we were in such a situation, even though we could say X, Y, and Z, we don't know how we would react in 2022 if we were in that situation. And there's a difference between condoning or even removing the stigma and just acknowledging that there's a certain percentage of our community that has a different sexual orientation. That's just the truth. And regardless of what the numbers are, it's not 0.001%.
It's much larger than anybody thinks it is.
Much larger than anybody think it is. You don't have to get into the politics of X. It's not 0.001%. There are people in every shul who are struggling with this. So I don't think that acknowledging that this is the situation, I don't think that that's condoning. I think it's just beginning to grapple with a really painful situation for these individuals and for their families.
And anybody that they're close with.
Right.
People ask me often, why can't Rabbanim announce this? And why can't shuls say this? And why can't the community do this? My answer, and I'm just one person, is because we are close to 6,000 years old as a Jewish people. And there were many things that took 5,000 years to talk about, and 5,500 years to talk about, and 5,777 years to talk about. Not everything can be spoken about at one time. And as painful as it is, look at the conversation we're having today, that you did not talk about this a year ago.
But I think it's important not to conflate talking about it with a mazel tov.
Yeah.
We never have to apologize for the Ribono Shel Olam. We believe in full faith that the right way to carry out one's life, we don't have to be shy of saying it, is that God told us to live our lives. That's it doesn't mean to judge anybody, it doesn't mean to whatever. So on the one hand, we have to have full faith that what the Torah says is in fact the will of the one who created all of us. Doesn't mean we always understand it. But we do think that it's time to begin to acknowledge that there are a certain number of people, not a small number of people in our community, that are dealing with this, and to work together with poskim. I'm not a posek, I'm a rabbi. To work together with poskim, to work together with community leaders, families, and yes, the individuals themselves, to listen to them, just listen to what they're saying and what they're going through, so that together we can find a way forward.
You and I are both avoiding giving any percentage, because we both understand that if we give the percentage that we understand that it is, then people in the audience will just react and say, it's impossible. Rebbetzin Adina, if you could change one thing in the last 12 years since Gedalia was 15, he's now 27, what might that be?
The way I responded originally. I think that it just took me a long time to really accept what was going on. It took me too long, I think, to get to the point of really being able to empathize with Gedalia and what he was going through. I think I was carrying around whatever. I mean, we also at the beginning, we were not telling anybody. We were praying, that too many people wouldn't find out, and that it was very, very difficult to walk around with that. I was very angry about a lot of things over the years, and I think it was misplaced anger, at him. It took me a long time to get to the place of really, really understanding what he was going through from his perspective, and learning, to empathize that and to try to see things from his perspective. It just took me too long to get there. And that is something that I definitely regret. And I wish I could go back and change. Again, it was 12 years ago and things were very different then. I would hope that, if we had started this journey now, that maybe I would know a little bit better, but I don't know. But that's definitely something that I would change.
Yeah, Adina always says one thing that I think is so important, and I didn't do this. Everything you're hearing tonight changed when Adina started really listening to Gedalia and trying to put herself in his shoes, and then relating to me these conversations. And that's one thing we really can share with other parents, that listen to your children who are acting in ways that you don't understand. Listen and understand the pain that they're going through. Get to that place, right? Be nosei ba'ol, as my wife always talks about, to carry their burden with them. And then it makes you understand, and it also makes it easier to work with and to have that child as part of your family, when you understand that they're really the ones in pain. They're really the ones suffering. We're just kind of getting it secondhand.
There isn't any family, we all understand these days, that there isn't a family that doesn't go through some life situation that's challenging, whatever it may be, early in their marriage, later in their marriage, early in life, later in life. We don't have to name all the names of all the difficult situations that people are going through. You have been extraordinarily open conversationalist about Gedalia and your family, and also extraordinarily honest in responding to people's difficult questions. This conversation was recorded this evening. I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the conversation, but you were aware that it is. And we will make it available to individuals. Would you like to give your email? Because I know you have If I'm putting you on the spot, I will retract within the question, because you have so many people that are calling you and asking you for advice on how to deal with their own son, daughter, family member, or we can make that available another time.
I think what I would say is that my wife and I feel that it wasn't an accident that Gedalia is our son, and that, we have a responsibility, or an opportunity / responsibility, to try to help other parents who are earlier on this journey. To that effect, Adina's starting, with my help as well, an organization. We're in the beginning process of starting an organization to be able to be there to help parents. We want to get a certain apparatus set up so we don't get, we get many, many phone calls and emails to speak, and we don't want to overwhelm our newly established system that we're just getting going. But over the coming months, certainly over the coming year, there will be word, I'm sure, that the parents who need to get to it will be able to get to it. OHEL will have the information. Other organizations will have the information to reach a new parent family organization that Adina and I will be starting. And once we're ready, we do hope to be able to answer all of your questions if we can. We'll be hiring other rabbis, rebbitzins, mental health professionals specifically trained in these areas, because there has to be somebody to help all of our families.
I want to thank Yitz Selman, my colleague, director of OHEL's Adult Mental Health Housing Program, for organizing this evening, for inviting Rebbitzin Adina and Rabbi Mark Penner to speak about Gedalia and their family. You should know that this conversation posed many questions that people asked on the chat. There are 56 more questions that I am looking at that we did not pose yet, and we've spoken for more than an hour. Obviously, this issue resonates. Obviously, this issue is important. We'll stop for the evening with our profound thanks, wishing you well, and wishing everyone, as we're coming to the holiday of Pesach, that everyone should be safe and happy and healthy, and enjoy your family in every which and possible way. Thank you very much, Rabbi Mark and Adina Penner.
I just do one more thank you that has to be said before we finish. We have to say thank you to our son Gedalia, because just as difficult as it is for us to share our life, Gedalia's life is out there, and the struggles that he is out there in front of everybody, and that's tough. But he understands that if that helps another family or another person that's willing to have his life out there. So we want to thank him for letting us and encouraging us to do this. And we love you, Gedalia. And you're helping a lot of people yourself and by letting us talk about all these things.
Please tell Gedalia that he is a mashpia, that he is an influencer and a teacher.
Certainly is. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us on this discussion this evening with Rabbi Mark and Rebbitzin Adina Penner. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.